Britain was once called the workshop of the world, and 6 industries built that reputation. Every single one of them collapsed, not by accident, not by fate, but through a toxic mix of bad decisions, political warfare, and a stubborn refusal to adapt. What you're looking at is deindustrialization on a scale that reshaped an entire nation. Start with the one that literally fueled everything: coal. Britain's relationship with coal goes back centuries, but at its peak in 1913, the country pulled 292 million tons out of the ground every single year. By 1920, 1.2 million people worked in the mines. That's 1 in every 20 workers in the entire country underground, hacking away at coal faces so Britain could power its factories, heat its homes, and run its railways. Fast forward to 2019, and the coal industry employed 699 people. Not 699,000, 699. That's a workforce roughly 2,000 times smaller than its peak, and today just 3 coal mining businesses survive in the entire United Kingdom. So what happened? The short answer is Margaret Thatcher. The longer answer is more complicated, but she's still in it. The 1984 miners' strike was the defining battle. Arthur Scargill led the National Union of Mine Workers against pit closures, and Thatcher's government was ready for the fight. Declassified documents later revealed that the Ridley Plan, drawn up in 1977, had specifically outlined how a Conservative government could break the unions, stockpile coal at power stations, undermine union finances, train special police units for the picket lines. Thatcher herself called striking miners the enemy within. The most violent flashpoint came at Orgreave in June 1984, the Battle of Orgreave, where mounted police charged picket lines in scenes that shocked the country and have been debated ever since. 11,000 miners were arrested, 8,000 were prosecuted. The strike lasted nearly a year and the miners lost. But here's what people forget. On September the 30th, 2024, Britain shut down its last coal-fired power station at Ratcliffe-on-Soar, becoming the first G7 nation to eliminate coal power entirely. In 2012, coal still generated 40% of Britain's electricity. 12 years later, that number hit 0. So was the destruction of coal mining a tragedy or a necessary transition? Uncomfortably, it was both. The industry needed to decline, the communities didn't need to be abandoned, and they were. Steel came next. It was one of the commanding heights of the British economy, so important that Labour governments nationalised it twice. When Harold Wilson brought it under state control in 1967, around 350,000 people worked in the sector. Today, that number sits at roughly 37,000. Between 1974 and 1986 alone, steel workers lost 166,000 jobs. The 1971 census counted 323,000 steel workers, and a decade later, that figure had nearly halved to 167,000. The reasons read like a checklist of industrial self-sabotage. 20 years of political manipulation left companies with outdated equipment, plants running below capacity, government price controls that strangled investment, and growing competition from abroad. Nobody modernized, nobody invested. And then everyone acted surprised when the industry couldn't compete. The collapse is still unfolding. In 2024, Tata Steel announced 2,800 job cuts at Port Talbot in Wales, shutting down both blast furnaces and the coke ovens. The company reported losses of more than £1 million every single day. The knock-on effect is expected to eliminate 12,000 jobs in total. The British government offered £500 million toward a transition to electric arc furnaces, a cleaner, more flexible technology that's central to the global push for decarbonisation in heavy industry. But the fundamental reality remains. The UK's biggest steel markets are far away, manufacturing is cheaper elsewhere, and the British economy shifted to services decades ago. Steel didn't just decline, it was allowed to wither through neglect. Third on the list is shipbuilding, and this one stings because Britain didn't just build ships. Britain invented modern shipbuilding. Between 1800 and 1950, 13 of 15 major ship innovations were first widely adopted here. Between 1950 and 1980, only 3 of 14 originated here. That single statistic tells you everything. In 1924, Britain produced 60% of the world's ship tonnage. By the end of the 1920s, that had slipped to 50%. By the mid-1930s, less than 40%. The empire was breaking apart, and British ship owners started looking elsewhere. High wages, a strong pound, terrible labour relations, and management that couldn't adapt to the post-war world all accelerated the fall. Japan and West Germany built better ships, faster and cheaper. The industry was nationalised in 1977 as British shipbuilders. Then Thatcher arrived. Many argue her government deliberately ran down the nationalised yards to justify privatisation. And whatever the intent, the result devastated communities across the northeast of England and Scotland's Clyde. The great yards fell one by one. Swan Hunter on the Tyne, Camel Laird on the Mersey, and Harland and Wolff in Belfast, the yard that built the Titanic, which only recently escaped closure. Today, Britain can't even build its own Royal Navy support vessels. Tankers for the fleet are constructed in South Korea. The country that once built ships for the entire world now imports them. Cotton was fourth, and the numbers are staggering. By 1860, Lancashire, then known as Cottonopolis, the cotton capital of the world, had 2,650 mills, employing 440,000 people and producing half of the world's cotton cloth. Cotton exports surged from £5.4 million in 1800 to £46.8 million by 1860. Lancashire had everything going for it: the right climate to prevent fibres splitting, water to power the mills, a willing workforce, and entrepreneurs with genuine vision. Then the American Civil War hit. The Lancashire cotton famine between 1861 and 1865 devastated the industry when Confederate cotton couldn't reach British ports. It recovered, but the warning signs were already there. After World War I, countries like Japan started weaving their own cotton, and by 1933, Japan had become one of the world's largest cotton manufacturers. 800 mills closed through the 1930s, and 345,000 workers walked away from the industry. By the 1980s, mills were shutting at a rate of 1 per week. When Elk Mill in Oldham closed in 1998, it was among the last cotton spinning mills in Lancashire. Built in 1927 as the final mule spinning mill ever constructed in the county, it had outlived an entire industry. The towns that cotton built, places like Oldham, Bolton and Blackburn, are still struggling to recover. Some of them haven't. Fishing came fifth, and the numbers there are equally grim. The British fishing industry now accounts for 0.03% of the national economy, roughly half the size of the United Kingdom biscuit industry. The number of fishers dropped from 25,000 in the 1980s to around 10,000 today. The fleet shrank from over 10,000 vessels to just 4,080 by 2022. And Britain's fishing decline didn't start with Brexit. It started decades earlier, including the Cod Wars with Iceland, 3 separate confrontations between the 1950s and 1970s, in which Iceland extended its fishing limits and ultimately forced British trawlers out of some of the richest waters in the North Atlantic. Those losses were never fully replaced. Then came Brexit. 9 out of 10 people in the fishing industry voted leave, believing it would mean reclaiming British waters and rebalancing quotas. It didn't work out that way. EU boats still fish in United Kingdom waters. Post-Brexit paperwork created nightmares for time-sensitive exports like salmon and shellfish. Seafood exports fell from 452,000 tons in 2019 to 330,000 in 2022. Former Brexit Party MEP June Mummery put it plainly in 2023. What fishing industry? We've completely lost it. Blaming the EU alone is dishonest, though. Britain's own policies allocated fishing quotas to large companies rather than small, sustainable fishers. International conglomerates bought up quotas for the most valuable species, controlling prices from sea to plate. A handful of Scottish ports benefited. England's landings dropped 3%. Wales lost 20%. The industry was gutted long before Brexit. Brexit just ripped off the bandage. And finally, cars. In the mid-20th century, Britain ranked as the second largest car manufacturer on Earth. The Jaguar E-Type, widely considered one of the most beautiful cars ever designed. The original Mini, revolutionary in its engineering. Land Rover, MG, Triumph, Austin Healey, Rolls-Royce. These weren't just cars, they were cultural icons. Then came British Leyland. Formed through hasty mergers in 1968, it was a disaster from the start. Fragmented supply chains. Constant strikes costing roughly 4,000 vehicles per week in lost production. The cars themselves became a national joke. The Austin Allegro and the Morris Marina were so unreliable, they developed their own folklore of mechanical failure. By 1975, the company was bankrupt and nationalized. Derek "Red Robbo" Robinson became the face of union militancy at the Longbridge plant. Responsible, it was claimed, for hundreds of walkouts, but management was no better. Too many brands, too many factories, and no coherent strategy between any of them. By the 1980s and 90s, nearly every mass-market British car brand had been sold off or collapsed entirely. Honda's Swindon plant closed in 2021. In 2024, Britain produced fewer cars than in any year since 1954. Pandemic years aside, production in the first half of 2025 dropped another 12%. The factories that remain mostly belong to foreign companies now: Nissan, BMW, Ford. 6 industries, millions of jobs. Communities across Wales, Northern England and Scotland left devastated, many still feeling the effects decades on. The same pattern repeats across every single one: failure to invest, failure to modernize, labour disputes that benefited nobody, governments that either interfered too much or abandoned industries entirely. And always the assumption that British greatness was permanent, that it didn't need to be earned again and again. It did, and it wasn't.